this week on the BackTable podcast.
Because I think AI is now.
Yeah.
People are talking about virtual reality, augmented reality. They're talking about all, whatever buzzword bingo you want to play. But I think AI is now. I think when we're trying to look at applications from technology that are affecting medical education, affecting medicine and healthcare now, AI, I think, is top on that list. But also it's an area that people just don't understand.
You can always make changes. And as long as Rusty says, I'm just putting together a hodgepodge of what everybody said. But as Rusty says, you just keep going forward, keep moving forward. You'd have to just get started and move. And if you hire the wrong CEO at first, get rid of them, find somebody else. You're never stuck.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the BackTable Innovation Podcast. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and on backtable.com. This is our next installment in the BackTable Innovation Show, where you will hear stories from physician entrepreneurs who are helping to drive healthcare forward through medtech innovation. Now, a brief message from our sponsor. Our next sponsor has a product that I literally use every day. I started taking it, and well, first of all, how did you first hear about it?
Sherry is kind of plugged into like the vitamin, I guess, supplement world. And like, it was definitely something she was familiar with, but like, I didn't get onto it until you told me about it. And I don't know, for a lot of the reasons like that you were kind of had been passed on to you about quicker recovery, which I don't care about, better sleep, which I care about a lot.
Yeah.
Is really kind of why I got into it. And plus, like, no one is going to accuse me of having the healthiest diet. I mean, I'm kind of like a burger and fries kind of guy.
Oh,
and so I thought a little bit, I'm super burger and fry oriented. But anyway, so I don't have the healthiest diet. And so I thought like some vitamins can do me well. And so it was the sleep component that did it for me. If anyone tells me like there's any kind of sleep tip, I'm all about it.
Oh, sleep is everything in your 40s, man. When I turned 40, it's like sleep is essential to just feeling, good the next day. It wasn't until I guess I had kids where I realized how important sleep is. But you probably realize the same thing, right? When you've had
I'm not 40, so I can't relate to that. But no, the reason I know sleep is important, Sherry is in sleep medicine. And so any kind of like sleep hack she can turn me on to. And she had vetted Athletic Greens. And so she gave it a stamp of approval. And, it's all like about incremental gains. I just want to be a little bit healthier. I'm moving into my 40s. We got a little baby girl. I want to make myself last as long as possible. So, for anything that for me, it takes me 20 seconds. Like my routine in the morning is I come downstairs, pour it in like a very small amount of water. I'll do it like 8 ounces or 12 ounces. I'll put the whole thing, like the scoop, and then add I think it's like the vitamin D. And then I chug it. Like it takes me like 15 seconds. I chug it right off the bat. I rinse a little bit more water and get the dregs kind of out, and I'll woof it down. It takes me, I don't know, less than a minute.
I agree with you. I've been really happy with it. And Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/BackTableINN, as in innovation. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/BackTableINN to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Now, back to the episode. This is Aaron Fritts as your host this week. Today we have 2 very special guests, fellow hosts on the show, Bryan Hartley and Eric Gantwerker. Welcome, guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, Aaron. Good to be here on the other side.
That's right.
Yeah, it feels a little weird. I won't lie.
It does.
Well, we're going to get over that awkwardness here quick, right? we gotta break the ice here. For this episode, I wanted to turn the tables a bit and let the audience know a bit about our hosts, what we've done. We've done this on the other shows, on the ENT show, Urology, IR, but I think it's about time we give you guys a little more credit for all the work that you put into your personal ventures and kind of hear more about them, and give the audience some more context as to, why do you guys enjoy talking to physician founders so much? I know why I do, but I want to hear from you guys. And, I also first want to just say I really appreciate everything you guys bring to the show. You both have your own unique styles. I definitely learn things from you as I listen to your episodes. And, Eric, you've always had the gift of gab, and I love that. You do a great job of making our guests feel comfortable and from the get-go, and it's very conversational, and I love that. And then Hartley, your background, as a medtech founder, definitely, you always hit the right questions. I'm always like, oh man, I don't know how you thought about that, and so I think that just comes from your personal experience and you having the network you do, and I think that it brings the right questions to every interview, and so anyway, I just want to thank you guys both for bringing the effort to every episode.
I definitely have question envy from Hartley. So.
No, thanks. No, hey, thanks for providing us a platform so we get to talk, right, Eric?
Yeah, 1,000%. Thank you for doing this, Aaron. It really means a lot for us.
I think I learned more from this maybe than even our listeners do. To be honest, I learned so much every single time.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I'm happy to see our numbers climbing, more and more people listening. So to get started, I want to briefly ask you guys, first start, like, where did you train and kind of where you're at today? And then we'll get into like your personal journeys to med tech and med innovation. But just real quick, Eric, where are you now? And or tell us a little bit about like where you trained.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Chicago. Let's see. I was born on a snowy Tuesday. No, I'm just kidding. So I trained in Chicago. So I did my medical school, Rush Medical College, where my brother actually went, which I went kicking and screaming. Just kidding. I really enjoyed it, actually. And then I did my otolaryngology residency at University of Cincinnati and Cincinnati Children's, and then went into Peds ENT over at Boston Children's. But then sort of my life took a little bit of a turn there because I was really interested in education and got my master's in medical education at the medical school there, and as well as the education school, a couple other schools there. And then I went down to Dallas, where obviously I met Gopi and you. And I was there for about 2.5 years, and then went to Chicago for about 2 years. And then now I'm at Northwell Health, Long Island Jewish, Cohen Children's, however many things you want to put together into one name, which is affiliated with Hofstra University, which is our academic institution.
So are you in the city or just outside the city?
I'm on Long Island, which I did learn about a year ago that I have to say on Long Island, not in Long Island.
Oh, got it. Okay. I wasn't aware of that. How close to the beach are you?
Everything's pretty close, actually.
Yeah.
From North Shore to South Shore is actually a pretty short distance. Long Island is, as the name suggests, is actually long. Yeah, it's about a 2.5 hour drive from point to point.
Whoa. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think Kieran has a place, his family's got a place there. He goes surfing in the summers.
Yeah, there's a lot of surfers out here. That is something, you want to put something on the map about Long Island that I didn't know? There's surfing here. I had no idea.
Yeah, I've seen surf competitions out of Long Island. Which is crazy to think of, when they get a big swell or whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't know how they coordinate that stuff. But anyway, well, yeah, for the audience, I met Eric via Gopi, my wife, here in Dallas, and they were working together at Children's. And, Eric and I kind of hit it off when I started BackTable, and I found out that he was really into, the education space. And he kind of told me a little bit about Level X. And I remember meeting you at a coffee shop and us just kind of spitballing ideas and getting, great feedback from you about BackTable when we were first starting. So I just like the fact that we've always stayed in touch and always trading ideas. And remind me, so you left Dallas. What year was that?
2018.
2018.
March of 2018. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then you were in Chicago for a little while, and then that's right.
Yeah. And interesting enough, even when back then, BackTable has evolved. And, one thing that we talk about a little bit, but a lot of startups sort of evolve as they grow. Yeah. And I think BackTable is a great example because some of the things that you and I talked about early on is not what BackTable is today. It's definitely evolved, and it's definitely changed directions here and there. I think for the better, obviously. I think this is a fantastic venture that you have, but it definitely shows sort of your flexible thinking and sort of your thought process as this evolved over time.
Yeah, and Hartley will attest to that for sure, because Hartley's been there from the beginning. I don't know why he believed, like, of all people, like he
thought it was a cooking show.
He had my back from the beginning. He thought he was going to get good food.
Love to cook.
That's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, just before Bryan tells his background, Bryan was my resident when I was a fellow at Vanderbilt, and you were a second year, I think, right?
Yep.
And it was my first, like, I walk in the door, day one of fellowship, and Bryan's my resident. And
you were so unlucky for that. I'm just going to throw that out there. So many other better residents you could have had, but we had fun.
We had a lot of fun. I think you showed me around more than my co-fellow Robbie did. Robbie just kind of left me hanging.
Well, he's laid back. Robbie was real laid back.
Yeah. I think you saw the me with the like deer in the headlights look, and you're like, this guy needs help. And I remember like leaving my keys behind often, and you would like drive them over to my house for me because I couldn't get in my house. I was so like just exhausted mentally. But yeah, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, Bryan.
Yeah. So training wise, was at Vandy for med school, residency, and then IR fellowship as well. Other than that, pretty much straight through. Ended up practicing for a year at Vanderbilt after I finished fellowship. And then that's when I went out to Stanford for biodesign. I guess I thought I hadn't had enough training, so I thought I'd do a little extra year out in California.
Yeah, so let's jump into that, because I remember you telling me that because you stayed on after your fellowship as an attending in IR. And I remember you telling me, I think I'm going to do a Stanford Biodesign program. And I know you've always been into innovation, but tell us a little bit about the program and sort of like why you wanted to pursue it and kind of how it works.
Yeah. Okay. So basically became interested in med devices, I'd say, in medical school, but didn't really get a chance to participate in any projects until residency. We had a little bit of time during our fourth year of residency, so joined a lab there. And I'd known about biodesign, heard about it through med school and residency, but really got the fever pitch, I'd say, towards the end of residency when I was in this robotics lab, Bob Webster's lab, where we were working on a transoral, basically endoscopic robot for the lung. So the program itself, I ended up applying twice, actually. Didn't get in the first time. And that's when I ended up being and attending at Vandy for a year, applied again, and finally got in. So it was quite a process. I'll tell you at least a little bit about the interview process. It's the craziest thing craziest interview process I've ever been through. It's 2 days. Everybody flies out to Stanford, and it's everything from brain games, brain teasers. We had to sit there in a room full of some of the best med tech innovators around. And they would ask you, they'd say, hey, I want you to invent a new way to cure or improve or treat degenerative disc disease. And you've got 3 minutes, and I want you to brainstorm all the ways on the board. And that was the craziest thing I think I had ever been through. So I'm sitting there with Paul Yock and inventing new ways to decompress the spine. In addition to that, we had a psych evaluation by a psychologist.
Wow.
Yeah. So we went in, and he would ask you, he literally, kid you not, piece of paper on there, and he gives you a piece of paper, gives you a pen, and he goes, I want you to draw your life story and your career path. Go.
Wow.
What do you do to that? What would you do? I don't know. I drew a picture of tennis. I drew a picture of Tennessee.
Lots of stick figures.
Yeah, so many stick figures. I drew a needle as an IR. I drew like a syringe and a needle.
Yeah, surgeon needle. That could have gone multiple ways, right?
Yeah, I don't do drugs. All right, So that was. This guy was like Goodwill Hunting. It was literally he's Robin Williams from Goodwill Hunting.
Oh my Lord.
And he gives you this piece of paper, and he's like, draw your career, whatever you want to draw. I was like, what do I draw? He's like, whatever you want.
Oh my God.
So
did you draw apples?
What's that? I should have drawn out. You like them apples?
Yeah.
That's good. No, it turns out he ends up being we meet with a psychologist every 2 weeks in the program.
Holy cow.
Our team did. So anyway, it was a crazy interview over 2 days. I had to do it twice, and that, I knew a little bit more the second time though, so that was good.
So the psychologist knew you were crazy because you were coming through twice?
Exactly. He's like, well, yep, he's perfect for med tech. He's insane.
He's gonna be
he doesn't know what he's doing.
He's a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, okay. He's gonna leave a job. He wants to do this other than take a job. Okay, he's definitely nuts. So the program itself, it's 11 months long. There are 12 of us. So there's 3 teams of 4, 2 physicians, 2 engineers. And we basically go through the entire biodesign book, the core principles. That's identify a clinical need, invent a solution around it, and then implement a business plan. We mainly do the first two parts of that, but it involves with your team going into the hospital at the beginning, and you're going to find hundreds of needs. 300 needs is kind of what we targeted. And then you filter those down over a couple of months doing just mountains of research, online, PubMed, every paper you could find, market research. You're going out there and interviewing physicians. So you whittle those down to about your top 4 needs. And then you go into brainstorming, and that's where you're going to invent. So we'll go into these white-walled rooms, take a bunch of caffeine, bunch of candy, and you spend just to get that rush. And you spend an hour or so in there at a time because you can't really do more than that. Your brain explodes. And you invent, and you're writing down 50, 100 ideas, and then you catalog them, and you do the same thing. You filter them down until you're left with your top inventions. Then you go and do all sorts of IP searches, make sure that there isn't anything out there in the space already around it. Then once you have it kind of boiled down, then you start your implementation process where you will build a business plan around it and then end up pitching it for funding. And a lot of the teams will take it forward into a startup. Maybe 1 or 2 members of each team will kind of be the project leader, so to speak. And they'll often spin it out. Biodesign spun out more than 50, maybe 60 startups so far. Many that you might recognize: iRhythm, publicly traded company, with their patch, their arrhythmia patch, detection patch, Shockwave, Todd Brenton, who of course we've had on before, another publicly traded company. So a lot of big stuff coming out of biodesign. So it's a lot of pressure, but it's a blast.
How does it handle all the IP and the equity and stuff of those startups?
Oh my God. So that's hugely important. At the beginning, we all signed something that said, well, first off, everything's going to go to Stanford when you invent it in the program.
Sure.
So Stanford will own the IP, and then we decide at the beginning to split royalties. If anything comes back to Stanford, you know how they divvy it up. Your inventors will get 30 or 40%. And so we decided we were going to split that equally. When it comes to what you do after biodesign, starting a startup, equity in a company, that is no holds barred. You can come up with whatever you want. People will argue they should have 4% of a company, but they're not going to be involved with it going forward, or,
Wow.
So you have to have these conversations. That's what we're all learning.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so we had good mentors that would talk about it, and they'd say, hey, you realize how much work a startup is, and you realize how much it's going to change probably over the next 3 years.
So is that why it's such an intense process to weed out the people? I mean, clearly it's a lot of work. 2-day interview process, they're just, torturing you, trying to see if you have the grit for it.
I feel like this is SEAL training.
They're watching you the whole time. You're with the other fellows the whole time. They're watching you because I did that process, on the other side.
Yeah.
They do it, so there's 2 things. Todd Brenton would always say there's one main thing he's looking for, and that's hunger. And he's like, that's not really something that, you can just learn. You kind of just have to have it. Yeah. And so demonstrating hunger means applying twice, those types of things.
Right.
Demonstrating that you're committed to it. You've done something in the field already, whether it's, designed something, gotten it to commercialization. But that's really what they're looking for. They're looking for hunger.
And how many, give us an idea of how many people apply and then how many people are accepted?
Good question. So 12 at the end, but starting off, there's maybe 160, 200 people apply.
Oh, shit.
They will interview 24. So once you get to the interview phase, you got a 50-50 shot.
Yeah, that's cool.
Wow.
Oof.
And so then after that, down to 12. And like I said, if you're a physician, there's 6 spots for physicians.
6. Oh, okay. All right.
Because they're going to take, it's half and half. The other half are engineers or business people. Usually maybe 1 or 2 people is a combination of both.
Okay. So there's nobody who's just a strictly MBA, coming in without any sort of engineering or medical background?
Yeah, no, you definitely have to have medical background. That's one thing they will, in some way, whether you worked for a company already as an MBA, but I think they'd be open to it. I think they put unique teams together. So they're looking for certain personalities to fit on a team. Psychology is huge. Like the psychologist plays a big role in putting the teams together.
Yeah.
And they're looking for, a type A personality with, maybe, well, they're all type A, but looking for somebody who's a little more laid back, somebody who's going to be a leader. And that's what they're trying to do. Somebody's going to be a builder, a creator. So they have a rubric. They don't really share it with us, even when you're in there, but we know it's something like that.
Wow.
It's interesting. So, as a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs build teams, I wonder if they sort of take some of those learnings. Like, have you learned how to look for a good team, how to build your teams to scale based on sort of that background?
That's a great question. And I'm not going to say every team worked out perfectly. That's why we met with, I think that's probably the bigger learning, Eric, for us is like, there are always going to be problems with teams. I mean, we all got along, but the second you are put together with 4 people all day for 11 months, every day, and you've got to be productive and 300 clinical needs and whittle those down with research, you're going to bump heads. And we did. And that's why it was so important to have basically our psychologist be with us. We'd had a session every week. He's a marriage counselor, actually. That's by trade.
Cow.
And it couldn't be more perfect.
I was going to say it's probably perfect for this.
It's perfect because you're in there and at the beginning, you're just kind of sparring. You got the gloves on and you're just like, yeah, it was good. I think we had a good time that day. And then by the end, you're like, I want to get into this person's deepest, darkest secrets. And, I know there's some trauma there and we should talk about that.
Wow.
I mean, you're really
it's like
getting
a therapy
into
session.
it. Oh, no, it is. It is. It's like, you learn that transparency is super important on a team.
Yeah.
You cannot just sit there and be passive aggressive. That will kill a company, kill a team.
Yeah.
If you've got a problem, you need to share, which there will be problems. You've got to share it and open it up and try to understand the other side. It was definitely the most unique aspect of the program was the therapy session.
Oh, absolutely. And Jim Collins, good to great, right? Get the right people on the bus and then figure out where you're going.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it could be a reality show, like Mark Cuban's reality show. And
oh my God, that'd be awesome.
No doubt. And then at the end,
call CBS.
Who's going to take the company forward? How do you decide that?
Yeah.
Who's going to be the CEO? How much equity are you going to get versus somebody else?
Holy cow.
Yeah.
But you got to face those things. It's basically like training for a startup. I think that's pretty much what it is, which Aaron, you got to have those conversations.
Yeah. They're tough. Well, cool. So tell us about Palmera as much as you can.
Sure. So what we spun out, I met my co-founder, Harmeet Bedi. He's director of IP, interventional pulmonology at Stanford. Met him, and the clinical need that we saw was lung biopsies, right? Transbronchial endoscopic lung biopsies. So I watched him do a case, and I noticed he had his needle out and he was using these mobile C-arms, and he was just doing this on the 2D X-ray. These huge throws, and you can't see a nodule. You can't barely see your needle.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, this is crazy. I said, you guys don't have contrast? Like, how do you see where you're going or where the nodule is while you're taking this biopsy? He's like, we use this electromagnetic navigation thing, and it uses an old CT scan, and we register it to the patient during the procedure. And I assume I'm in the region, so I make these huge throws to make sure I, get everywhere I need to. I said, this was insane. There's you need contrast. And that was our first iteration, was trying to develop a way to generate contrast within the lung using X-ray. And so our first breakthrough, and we looked at all types of chemicals and things, and finally spoke with Norbert Pelk, this medical physicist, world-renowned medical physicist, and we came up with the idea of using air pressure as a contrast agent, just like you would use carbon dioxide angiography in the blood vessels. Except in this case, we were using the density of the tissue as if it was blood. So we would open and close the airways, including the alveoli. And what we noticed is when we did that with digital subtraction imaging, you could see the inflation of the lung. You could see the alveoli inflating, and then you could see the nodule would turn dark because it wasn't inflating.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
It was
super
basically
cool.
negative contrast. And so we were like, okay, this is really cool. So we went through, got an SBI and National Institute of Health SBIR grant, a couple foundation grants, and we really explored the heck out of that. In the end, we still kind of ended up with a little bit of the same problem because it's still a two-dimensional image. You know, you can see it. You can see the nodule better. A lot of those nodules are invisible, as you know, on X-ray, but we could make them visible, but that doesn't really help you if your needle's in front of it, behind it. You know, you'd have to be rotating all over the place to triangulate that.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be DSAing the patient. So we pivoted about 18 months to 2 years in, and we said, you know what, there's a solution out here, guys. It's CT. I mean, radiologists have been using CT guidance for, forever, and our diagnostic rates are about 90+% probably. Their diagnostic rates are about 70 to 80%, which is horrible, coming from our perspective.
And then what about the complication rates? Because the thing we worry about is pneumothorax, less so bleeding, although I've had some recent bleeding episodes that have been painful. Mm-hmm. I imagine because they're more central, it's the opposite. Like they're more worried about bleeding than pneumothorax. They
are. I mean, their pneumothorax rate's less than 2%. Which is great, and you'd be wondering why do they even do it over us? And that's the pneumo rate's one thing, but also they can stage it. If it comes back that it's positive on ROSE, rapid cytology, they'll just EBUS stage the lymph nodes in the mediastinum, and that's you can do a one-stop shop. But the problem is their diagnostic rate is just abysmal. Yeah. And so they need CT guidance. They don't have access to it, but what they do have is mobile C-arms. So what we said is, why can't we take a mobile C-arm, rotate it around the patient, and get a CT image, a cone beam CT image? So that's what we started working on, and we've shown that we can do it. So we have some nice, beautiful images of pig lungs, pig nodules, and it's a CT. I'd say it's a pretty good quality CT, and that is what we are taking forward right now. We've raised about $800,000 in non-dilutive grants, and that include the SBIR and the previous project, but $150,000 in friends and family fundraising, and the founders have put in some cash as well. And now we're looking to raise our seed round of funding from some angel investors. So, I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. I can tell you that. Practicing as well, as but it's a blast. And we're looking for more angel groups, the larger ones. Yeah. But we will save a few spots for physicians if they're interested in investing. So if anybody's out there and is interested in learning more about it, please get in touch with myself on LinkedIn, or my email is brian.hartley@palmera.com. Shoot me an email. Love to share a little bit more with you and see if there's interest in potentially investing in us.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Brian, so how does this compare to sort of the EBUS? Can they do EBUS guided biopsies? And then also, obviously, robotic bronchoscopy is starting to really flow into pulmonology. So how does this sort of compare to those technologies?
Fantastic question. So EBUS biopsies, they have to be centrally located because the EBUS scope is pretty big. There are some companies that are coming out with a small peripheral EBUS scope, and those are pretty cool. The only problem is you just don't trust ultrasound in the lung, as any radiologist, as anybody will tell you that works in the lung. Even one speck of air is going to screw up your imaging. And so they get a lot of false positives, whether it's, is this the nodule, or is this atelectasis? Is this hemorrhage? It's very hard to tell. So you're never going to trust it as much as you trust a CT scan, where you know exactly where you are. Now, as far as not the radial EBUS is not hugely important. It is a great adjunct, but I would take cone beam CT over that every single day of the week. And then you have robotics, which is kind of the elephant in the room. You got a $600,000 robot in Intuitive Ion, $600,000 robot in J&J's Auris Monarch. And what those really brought to the game, which is pretty critical, is stability. Like, I knew nothing about scopes, right? Like, I'm not a scope person, but they brought stability, which is so important. I know about stability in IR. We try to get stability with our guiding sheaths or catheters as much as possible, especially if we're putting a microcatheter through it. But it's the same thing with those robotic scopes. They can lock in place. And so now you're not going to move. You can make all your throws that you need to. And their navigation's nice and smooth. I mean, you're going with a cool remote controller.
It's an Xbox controller.
An
basically.
Xbox controller, exactly right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think they are going to live up to the hype. The issue that I have and that I think others see is, if you're still using an old CT to navigate off of them, doesn't matter how strong your stability is if you're not in the right location.
Right.
And the kind of the metaphor I use for this virtual navigation is, you guys have used Uber before. Have you noticed when the Uber driver's getting close to you, you'll see a little dot and it looks like it's driving close to you, and then it looks like it's on top of you. Then it'll move like 100 yards to the right and then move 100 yards to the other direction. And you're like, okay, where is this thing? And that's exactly how this virtual navigation is. And that's why it's so important for real-time kind of intra-procedural CT guidance. But I think they have a pathway. They're selling. They definitely are selling, and you wouldn't think they would for $600,000. But I think you have the combination of real cone beam CT imaging in the procedure with a robot. It's kind of unbeatable.
Yeah, that seems to be.
There's some, I've seen recently, there's some robotic percutaneous biopsy systems coming out of Europe and not available yet in the US, but do you know anything about those at all?
Yeah, I've seen them, and you probably know as much as I do. I think they're interesting. My only question with those, I think they could be helpful. My only question is, what problem are they solving? I think as a radiologist, you've done more CT guided biopsies than anybody. You're just like, well, how much trouble do I have getting it where I need to go?
Well, how does it account for patient movement? If I'm standing there and I'm, and then the patient's breathing or they're fidgety because they're under moderate sedation. I mean, the patient has to be perfectly still if you're doing a lung biopsy, and to have a robot that, they're fixed, but the patient's not fixed. Right.
Yep.
Right.
There you go.
So that's where I'm extremely nervous when, it looks cool. And in fact, when I'm over there, I'm planning on, visiting some docs that are using it and checking it out. But I just want to see the logistics. So
and what's the ROI? I mean, these cases don't really reimburse that much.
That's true.
And so, you're throwing in a robot to basically be a placeholder for a radiologist who's standing there. I think in the future, if you could make this remote, I think there's something there. I mean, if you could have it so a technologist can set it up and you could be, not even remotely biopsied.
Yeah.
I think you've got something. If you could have a radiologist who's doing this at multiple sites, I think maybe you could have something. And maybe that's what they're going for. But until that point, this feels like a solution looking for a need, not the other way around.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bryan, for that. Interesting to hear about Palmera and the exciting things you guys got going on. Yeah, very interested. Is there a minimum on the for docs, solo docs out there who might be interested in investing? Is there a minimum?
Yeah, we're looking at about 30,000 is the minimum.
Okay.
Everything's negotiable, when you're raising funds. But just interested in seeing if there are any docs out there who this resonates with, especially, with radiologists. I think CT guidance just sounds like an obvious answer. So that's why it's always good to have some image guiding experts on there.
Yeah. Well, sounds good. Well, let's turn it over to Eric. Eric, I want to talk about your background with medical education. You touched on it before, and you touched on it in prior episodes. But I want to know, what made you pursue the master's in education from Harvard, and how did you envision using that degree as part of your career, and what kind of opportunities have come from it?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and a very common question I get, and I'd like for Bryan to engage this question at some point too, which is the formal versus informal learning, and degree granting program versus some kind of intensive where you don't actually get a degree is a huge question I get all the time, and I'm a big believer in fate, for lack of a better term. And every entrepreneur and innovator I've talked to has talked about luck and talked about signs and talked about things that just made sense and they went with their gut. When I was finishing my fellowship, I sort of knew that I wanted to get an extra degree because I like giving money to higher education. And I really thought I was going to get maybe an MPH or maybe a master's in med ed, but a lot of the master's in med ed programs or the health professions education programs across the country were either remote or they had sort of a mixed hybrid at that time. There was a couple that were in person, and I knew that for me as a student, I learned much better in person in an immersed environment. And so I already actually had a master's, but it was a post-bac program that I did at Georgetown to get my master's in physiology and biophysics. Still don't know what biophysics is, but I definitely have a degree in it. And so I do, education was always of interest in mine. My dad was a public school teacher at Chicago Public Schools, and his number one rule to me was don't become a teacher. So I became a doctor instead, which, is Latin for teacher. So I said, I love education. I love teaching my colleagues, my peers, and I wanted to get practical skills. I wanted to be able to speak the speak and walk the walk. I thought if there was a degree granting program that sort of that offered me the opportunities to learn the things I wanted to learn, then I would do it. And at the same time, the Master's in Medical Education program at the Harvard Med School had just started. There was the first cohort. I got an email about 6 months before I was supposed to graduate. I was actually interviewing for jobs at the time. I'd been interviewing for jobs for about a year and a half. And I brought up to a few of them, hey, what would you think about me taking a year off? And most of them were pretty pissed off because they sort of were hiring me for that cycle and they didn't want to delay at all. Or they said, hey, we have our program here. Why don't you just do our program? I said, this is a first year. It offers a lot of opportunity to build my own program around what I wanted to do. And I saw it as a sign. I said, hey, I got this email right at the right time. I'm going to apply. The interview process wasn't as bad as what Bryan said, but you were like interviewing with like the head of research at the Harvard Medical School. All these really bigwigs that you're sitting in this room with. It was a lot of intimidation, a lot of imposter syndrome, which happens a lot in Boston. And I ended up getting in. And I was able to make a program of my own design. And because I was interested in technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, I decided to sort of build my program around that. So I was able to take classes at MIT, which wasn't even thought of or designed before. MIT is actually off cycle from the med school. So I had to figure out how to arrange that. No, I guess not a lot of people had done it before. And because it was the first year, they're like, sure, why not? So I was able to take game-based learning through the Scheller Institute of Games from MIT, which was a great program. And Eric Klopfer, who became one of my thesis directors on my thesis committee. And then I took stuff at the ed school. I took stuff at the business school, at the government education school, the Kennedy School, and really kind of built my own program, which was awesome. And there's a actual program at the education school, Technology, Innovation, Entrepreneurship. It's actually a tract that is at the ed school. It's a regular master's in education, but I ended up taking a lot of classes with those people. And a lot of those people did similar to what Bryan did, was they started companies. And so I know a lot of people from that space. In that year, one of my good friends, Rahim Katra, who's now at the Innovation Center at Calgary, UCalgary. And so met a ton of really good friends that I keep in touch with over the years. And it really was a fantastic opportunity. And then what I was going to do with it, I wasn't really sure. I really liked the educational technology aspect, and I thought that the way that medical education was taught historically was terrible. It was very antiquated. It was interesting time to be in Boston too. They were rolling out their new Pathways, or the Pathways program, which was their complete redesign of the Harvard Med Education curriculum. And so I got a little bit of a touch point with those individuals who were going through that, which was a 10-year process, which is funny because at the end of 10 years, you basically have to go back to the drawing board and redesign it again because things have changed in 10 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I, got some consulting opportunities, and I'm sure we'll talk more about those.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess tell us about the consulting opportunities and sort of how you became involved with Level X and then Level X has evolved, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've hugely evolved. At that time, it was called GTX Surgery. It wasn't even Level X. But at GTX Surgery, which was funny because we didn't have a lot of surgery applications, but a lot of procedural stuff. And so when I first started, I was interested in airway clinically. So they brought me on as a subject matter expert. So at that time, when I was moving to Dallas, I was still actually finishing my master's thesis project, which became, I was studying motivation online learning. So I got really involved in motivational theory, educational research, and then obviously the cognitive psychology of how people learn, which was really interesting. And then the whole game-based learning came hand in hand with the psychology, because you started to learn how games design for how people learn. It's so integrally related that it made sense for me. And so when I started advising for them as a subject matter expert for the first 2.5 years that I was involved with them, it was right at the time they were starting up that I was finishing my master's. Again, we talk about luck, we talk about timing, we talk about serendipity. They were just starting up at the time that I was finishing my master's. And so it just worked out perfect. And Sam, the CEO, came from the games industry. He worked at LucasArts. He was at Microsoft. He was part of the DirectX team that allows everybody to play video games on consoles using good graphics. Thanks to Sam for that. So he and I knew each other for a long time, and he trained, he did his CS master's, I think, at Stanford. And so he brought me on and said, hey, I want you as one of our initial advisors. His dad was an advisor at the time. And so it was me and his dad advising them on how does this look? Does this make sense? Does this reach educational accuracy for how we're trying to engage people in continuing professional development and CME? And then in 2017, October 2017, they got funded. So they were actually part of an accelerator at Matter, which was out of University of Chicago. And so they got some seed funding, and then they went through their Series A. And in October 2017, they got funded. And literally the next day, Sam called me and said, how do you feel about moving to Chicago and working for us part-time and cutting down your clinical load? And at that time, which is another thing we should definitely talk about, is I was 2 or 3 years out from fellowship, talking about decreasing my clinical load. That was a huge decision.
Yeah.
And at the time, I thought, when else am I going to get this opportunity? I thought I'd get this opportunity in 20 years. That I'd worked for a technology startup that was doing medical education using something innovative. And it happened 3 years out from fellowship. And again, my parents were ill at the time and living in Chicago. And I sort of felt that I might have to move at some point soon. Dallas, I loved. My practice was fantastic. My colleagues were fantastic. You didn't pay me to say that, but my colleagues were great. And it was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make in my life. And I went with my gut and I said, this is the right thing to do. I need to be home for my parents.
Yeah.
And then, a year after I moved to Chicago, my dad passed away. So luckily I got to spend that last year in town visiting him. So, but it made sense. And then since March of 2018, I've been splitting my time 60% working for my clinical practice, which has been Loyola and now Northwell. And then 40% or 2 days a week working for the medical video game company.
And what is, so didn't Level X was acquired as well, right?
Correct. Yeah. During the pandemic of all times. Yeah. I guess it was May or June of 2020, they got acquired by a company called BrainLab, which you may have heard of. And BrainLab acquired us for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that's sort of our hallmark is our level of quality and our level of fidelity. And just our technological capabilities impressed the CEO of BrainLab, and he loved us. And him and Sam got along like two peas in a pod, and they continue to today. And Stefan just saw what we had as a technology capability and saw what Sam was doing as a visionary leading us and said, let's do this. We're basically an independent subsidiary of BrainLab. So we still have our own sort of going ons, but, obviously our budget, which made it actually was perfect because Sam was always on the road trying to raise funds. He was always on the road. And finally, when we got acquired, he could step back into the role of introspective into the company and seeing what we were doing instead of being on the road trying to raise funds all the time. Yeah.
And so with that acquisition, did your role at the company change at all, or have you just been kind of, doing the same kind of thing you were before?
That's a great question. So when I was initially a subject matter expert, I was very much involved in sort of reviewing stuff for medical accuracy. Does this make sense? Does this look okay? As we went into other specialties that I wasn't in, like gastroenterology, pulmonology, cardiology, I sort of was a little bit on the development side, which was really cool. I actually got to sit with the medical team, did a bunch of the research, wrote a bunch of the cases, did some of the authoring in Unity with, some of the very, very simple tools that they built for us. I'm not a coder by any sense of the imagination, but I got that hands-on experience. And then I was reporting to Sam at the time, and I intermittently reported to the chief marketing officer. And eventually I said, I really would like to get more involved in strategy. I'd really like to get more involved in product development, more advising for the company on a higher level, on an executive level. And so I basically became the vice president medical director in 2018, but my role has evolved over the years to be completely cross-functional and completely horizontally integrated across the entire company, from sales to the production team to marketing to product to design. I'm completely horizontally integrated, which is actually really cool and really unique opportunity because I've seen it from all different perspectives.
Yeah, you're not acting in a silo, just kind of out there. I mean,
Correct.
You know everybody. You know everybody in the company by first name, and that's kind of nice.
Literally.
Yeah.
And from a chief medical officer, or even if you look up roles of chief medical officer, whatever that means, and medical director, more or less, for our purposes, it's the same. You see little portions of what I do for the company, but there is no real full boat of what I do because, I'm giving strategy. I'm reviewing stuff. I literally just reviewed stuff all this morning. Copy review, very simple, like marketing copy review to make sure, again, that it sort of hits that tone, that authenticity. Working with our sales, I do business development for the company, especially for our non-industry partners who are looking to sort of work with us, like the societies, organizations, grant funders, things like that. So I do business development, I do marketing, I do sales, I do design. I sit in on all the R&D discussions. I do product reviews with the leadership. So it's a very unique role, and I'm very happy to be in it. And it's an unbelievable opportunity that I never thought I'd have.
Well, I imagine it's a lot of great experience for, if you ever wanted to start your own startup, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
you know what it takes. And again, like you're not just isolated in the CMO position where you only, do whatever PR stuff or, give input on certain things. You can give input across the whole company wide, which sounds like a training program in itself.
It literally has been. And every day I would go and watch Silicon Valley, and I'd be like, Sam, is this how it actually works? And he's like, no, don't stop watching that show. I was like, it seems like this is how it works. And he's like, no, don't stop watching that show.
Like, no.
But yeah, so Silicon Valley, because literally as I was watching the show, they were going through the exact same thing. We were raising a Series A, then we were raising a Series B. We got bought out. It's like a very, very, it was paralleling actually pretty well. It was pretty interesting. I did get some other consulting opportunities. I was working as the vice president of medical education for a video surgical journal. I started my own LLC, which was doing consulting for medical education, people who want to do medical education. I do sort of my own workshops on teaching faculty on how to use technology, how to bring medical education to the 21st century. I work a lot with the Harvard Macy program, which I worked with when I was in Boston, and I continued to teach with them as a returning scholar. And then I recently got brought on as the founding advisor for an AI company that's doing touchless user interfaces. So they're actually using an AI algorithm to help with at least now single-handed input, but to do touchless user interfaces using just a standard webcam. So they can integrate with any platform. And so, I started diving deep into this. Aaron, you and I have talked about this, the whole AI world. I've really gotten fully engrossed into this and really delving deep. And this was just a little surface scratch of the AI world that I'm starting to get involved in.
Yeah, I told Harley this too. I feel like the innovation show is starting to become an AI show because we've had, a number of people on recently. I got Vic Sopti coming on tomorrow, who his stuff
great.
Sounds really cool. And then, we've got the theater.io guys coming on soon.
Because I think AI is now.
Yeah.
People are talking about virtual reality, augmented reality. They're talking about whatever buzzword bingo you want to play. But I think AI is now. I think when we're trying to look at applications from technology that are affecting medical education, affecting medicine and healthcare now, AI, I think, is top of that list. But also it's an area that people just don't understand.
Yeah.
And so people sort of get VR. They see it, they sort of understand it like, okay, yeah, it's a 3D environment. I get to interact with it. I still think VR hasn't reached its potential yet for a variety of reasons, which we can go into another time. Same thing with AR. But AI is actually on the ground getting integrated into many, many different platforms that will affect surgeons and doctors today.
No, let's get into this because I'm going to scratch the whole podcasting talk I was going to talk about. I want to talk more about VR. And I want to talk about AI, okay? Because I want to get both. And we can talk about the full-time to part-time.
We could have a whole
later.
5-hour show about this.
Yeah. But so, because I talked to Justin recently. Justin was on the show. And
talk about Stanford Biodesign. He was at Stanford Biodesign.
Yeah. He was
like a Zuckerberg though. He
dropped out,
rightly,
right?
Probably he dropped out. Yeah.
We
Rightly
interviewed
dropped
together.
out.
We interviewed together.
Yeah. Did you really?
Yeah, the first year when
Were
I
you guys
didn't
in
get
the same cohort?
Well, he was the first time that I didn't get in. I think he got in, and then I think his company got funded.
Yeah.
And then
I mean,
he
honestly,
left. I was like, thanks, I could have had that spot.
Yeah, seriously. No, too bad you couldn't be like, hey, I sort of did well on that psychology test. I'm not crazy.
Yeah, right.
So, but interesting, I do want us to talk about at some point the informal versus formal learning, because there is a lot of people that come to me and ask that question. Do I need a degree? Do I need to be in a program?
Right.
And Justin, rightly so, went into the program and said, I have the practical experience. I don't necessarily need this to be able to do this. And he just did it. And, kudos to Justin for doing that and recognizing that must have been like one of the hardest decisions that guy's ever made. Shiv dropped out of Johns Hopkins.
Right.
Well, he put his...
He got an MBA though. He got an MBA.
Correct. But he put his medical degree on hold.
Yeah.
Because again, like he felt like, hey, this is an opportunity. This is the time. This is the place. And that probably was a really tough decision for Shiv.
Yeah. I mean, I go back and forth all the time about an MBA because I don't have the discipline. I mean, those guys, the people that you're talking about, they're just like, they're avid
hungry.
readers. They read probably a book a day, right? And like
Yeah.
Elad Wallach, I had him on the show. He said he listens to audiobooks at 2.5x and he just flies through them. And I mean, these are just people that have processing speeds way higher than mine that I can't keep up. And so for me, I think I would enjoy the structure and discipline of like a program where
that's how I was.
I feel like I need that. That's how I learn. But that being said, having experience and then I think having a little bit of real world experience and then going and getting the MBA later. And a cousin of mine did that. And he feels like he got so much more out of the program than if he had done it straight out of like college.
Well, it's required too. You have to have at least 2 years of on-the-job experience before you can get MBA, except for the combined programs. Yeah.
Okay.
Except for the combined programs. But yeah, most of them, you have to have 2 years of real world experience because context matters so much.
Yeah.
You cannot learn anything in a silo, in a box. Like you have to have that relevancy as an adult learner. Sorry to go education speak, but you have to have that context, be able to attach the knowledge onto something foundational in your brain. Otherwise, it lives on an island in your brain and you can't access it very easily.
Yeah.
And so that context matters so much.
And just jumping in on your point on Justin, you have to look at it from a high level. And if you're just interested, if you have the hunger and the passion to go and found a startup, but you don't have a startup or you don't have an idea, going to a place like Biodesign is like the greatest thing you could do because you will come out with an idea. 100%. You will come out with an idea that is vetted. And if you want to take it forward, you can. I think in Justin's situation, which I don't know, all the details, but he had something already that even VCs at that point were validating, and he was getting funding, and I think that makes it you gotta chase that down. And I think even the faculty at Biodesign understood. I mean, they may be wow, we went through all this, but in the end they're like, okay, he's going to do something great with this, and that's what it's all about is directly helping patients in the end. But I mean, he had the right opportunity, and it was hitting on all cylinders at that point. You got to do it. But for those people who don't, you're talking that kind of, and are you thinking that Biodesign is that formal versus informal education? Is that kind of what you're seeing? Because it's a certificate. It's not even a degree conferring. It's just a certificate.
Right, but it's more structured, right? So
very structured.
A lot of the things that people ask me is, again, like the MBA question. Mm-hmm. People ask me specifically about education because that's sort of my area of interest is, I want to walk the walk. I want to learn education. And I go through this whole thing with them, like about how to determine what it is that you need or want for your career and how much time do you have to do it, right? And what kind of learner are you? I go through this whole analysis because I've been asked it so many times. But a lot of people I say, okay, you don't need a degree. You don't need to do a certificate program. You don't need even an intensive. You need to the sources. Like you need people to point you in the right direction. And that's the informal learning. And I'm doing that for actually a couple of people that are my mentees right now, literally just giving them the sources and they're learning on their own.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need a big degree program. They don't need to pay tuition. All the information's out there. They just need somebody to source it for them.
And I think a lot of, for you, Aaron, with the MBA part, I think, the MBA stuff for startup, what you learn in an MBA, I think you could learn very quickly. What a lot of people get from an MBA, at least from the people that I've spoken with, is a network. It's almost like being in college again or in residence. You just build a huge network, and that's very valuable along with the information you learn. But if you ask a lot of MBAs, they'd probably be like, you have a startup already? Like, no, you're learning in MBA. You're doing it right there. They'd say probably like, go get a CEO coach. They'd say find somebody who could be a mentor when you have questions, just as an advisor, and just, get them, because you're already doing it,
Yeah, that's what Shiv was saying. He said that, the biggest thing about the MBA program was the network.
Yeah.
And, and that's great too. And especially if you're looking to raise money. But the cool thing I like about BackTable is that we're kind of creating our own network.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was going to say,
how many people
network.
have you met?
But even,
how many
but
people
even
have you
Shiv
met?
said that about his podcast.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So
Yeah.
he said the exact same thing. Is like his podcast was serving as this opportunity to meet these pillars in the industry and network with them that you otherwise would have had to do an MBA for. So you're sort of getting the same experience.
Without a doubt. Now let's bring up this question I want to ask you guys, and because I think it's all on the same thing. How important do you think it is to step away from medicine? And
This is my second question.
Yeah, we
exactly
touched
the
on
question I
this a
have.
little bit with Chris Mancy, and it was just, he was a neurosurgeon in residency, and then he went to Stanford to do his MBA, and that's when he founded Viz. But we chatted about, how important is it to kind of walk the plank? And, I put it that way because it's like, that's a risk. I mean, we've all trained so hard and so long to get to practice and autonomy and all of that. And then now we're saying, I'm going to take a right-hand turn here. There's something else over here. I want to see what it is. It's a massive risk.
I've two relevant stories to that, but go ahead, Aaron.
No. I mean, I was going to say, especially where Eric was at 3 years out, like that's when you're falling into stride. Like that's when you got that momentum. You're no longer, you're out of that trainee mode, which you're still in the first couple weeks. And then suddenly you're like, I got this. I know what I'm doing. You got that confidence. And then just suddenly that's a big pivot is to just be like, no, I'm going to step away. Yeah.
So I was at a dinner. I had just moved to Chicago and I was working at Loyola at the time. And I met one of the fathers of pediatric ENT, this pillar, we all talk about our heroes and such. And he was at a dinner for one of the local society meetings. And I introduced myself. And I said, hi, it's nice to meet you. I'm Eric Gantwerker. He said, oh, where do you work? And I said, oh, I work at Loyola, but, I have this other side gig. I work for a medical technology company that's making medical video games for doctors. He took one look at me. I've never met this man before. We literally were just had a drink in our hands and said, what a waste of your education, and walked away.
Wow.
So, but that is the sentiment that I get sometimes from some people. And, the other relevant story was I talked to Mona Flores. So again, when you're in this space, you can just like LinkedIn message people, and these people who are in very high positions are very willing to spend their time with you, which is an amazing opportunity and such an honor. And I feel lucky to be able to do that. And I messaged, she's the head of medical AI for NVIDIA. So Mona Flores, who is a CT surgeon. And so I met with her and I was getting advice from her, and I said, you are 100% doing this. You left clinical practice. And I said, what does it feel like to not be in medical practice anymore? And she says, what did she say? It feels like I gave up my kids. Like that's a summary of what she said, but she said, I feel like there's a part of me that's missing, essentially. And so I asked her, I said, I have this opportunity to sort of maybe go one way or the other. Right now I'm 60-40, but sort of towing the line between especially academic practice and the private sector. It's not just clinical practice, it's academic, which is a whole nother ballgame. And I asked her, I said, at some point, I feel like I'm going to have to make a decision. And she said, is anybody forcing you right now to make that decision? I said, no. She's like, then write it as long as you can. And then the other advice I got was put in at least 10 years of clinical practice. Because you need to have relevancy and expertise and respect within your own specialty and with your own clinical knowledge and skills before anybody else is going to respect you. And I took that to heart, and I continued to say, people who aren't in clinical practice, it's hard to stay it's hard to know what the frontline people are going through when you're trying to create solutions for them. And I think that was sort of where I'm at right now, where I say I want to keep clinical practice. I also enjoy it, obviously, but I can't go be a CEO of a startup right now because it just takes so much time and energy and effort that I don't have the bandwidth to do that right now.
Yeah, the bandwidth is a huge thing. And Bryan and I have talked about this a number of times. I mean, I'm close to that 10 years, and every year I'm thinking, and I do like having some, I kind of agree with Mona Flores, which we got to get on the show, by the way. Going to zero it just feels like not possible. I don't know. And luckily for Bryan and I, we have diagnostic, which makes life a lot, it's more flexible, right? I mean, we can read teleradiology, you can really cut back your shifts. And, when the longer you do it, the more kind of confidence you have in like what you can read and how good you're at it. And so I kind of always have that to fall back on. And I mean, IRs say that anyway, because IR burnout rate's so bad that people are always like, well, I'll just read diagnostic when I burn out, procedures. But BackTable is all about procedures. It really has very little to do with diagnostic radiology, and other than the AI stuff. And so I do worry about that. Like, I want to stay relevant. I want to be able to have these conversations with people. Justin was saying that. He said, you can tell people who have stepped out of clinical medicine, they're not quite up to speed when you have these conversations sometimes. And that kind of worried me a little bit when I heard him say that.
You should ask Chris Mancy how he feels about that.
He doesn't care. He's like, nah, man, I didn't look back. Like he's in his element. And I think that's just it. It's like
every situation's unique. I think,
yeah, exactly.
So if you get a chance to start a startup or something that looks like it's going to be something that really makes an impact,
but
go
also
for
it depends on what you're doing. So one of my brother's best friends, Neil Ray, was an pediatric anesthesiologist in Boston. And he ended up starting a company called Radiant Oximetry, which does fetal pulse ox.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of relevant, but it's not like clinically like what he does. And he knew as a CEO, he had to do it 100%. And so he completely left clinical practice. He started Radiant Oximetry. They're going through FDA, which is another thing I'd like to talk to you about, Bryan, which is, the FDA process. They're going through the clinical trials. Unfortunately, it was COVID, so they had to put some of that stuff on hold. But he knew just the energy that it takes to be a CEO of a new startup is just not conducive to somebody. Now, I do see a lot of people who are shift workers or can turn their job into shift workers being much more likely to come into this space. People like emergency medicine, like radiology, where you sort of have it on your own time. But people like Justin and I, who you have to see patients in clinic, you have to do surgery, right? We can't just like take shifts, quote unquote.
Yeah.
It's not that easy. So you have to build a referral base, right? It's this whole big thing. Like EM doctors don't have to worry about referral bases, like all these things. It's a unique problem for some of these other specialties to be able to do this and do clinical practice.
Yeah, neurosurgery would be impossible. I mean,
But you see neurosurgeons that are in this space, right? I mean, you see it all the time. But again, that question of do you continue to do clinical practice is difficult, because if you need a referral base, you need operative time, you can't do it once a month. That's really hard to do.
Yeah. Like, I'm thinking about Hartley is Mahmoud Razavi, right? That guy's probably worked full time this whole time. And he just, and even, Rusty Hoffman, it's like, they either they don't sleep or they just are able to delegate. Maybe it's they're able to delegate and they have the right people around them.
Yeah, I think
it's probably more the former, actually. Probably,
and that's what it is. It's all of it. But it's with Rusty. He found a CEO immediately. Or that was his main goal early on, was get funding and find a business partner who can be that project leader. Who's going to drive it forward. But you have to have somebody who's going to drive it forward. In any startup, there's got to be the one person who is only thinking about it for 16 hours a day, every single day. And so is it you? And if it's not you, because you've got to do practice, then you need to find that person. And that's what it's about. For if you have an idea that you want as a physician, but you want to stay in practice and do all that, just find the person who wants to do it with you. And that's Mahmoud Razavi did that too.
Yeah. There's a caveat to that, because that person that you hire as the CEO has to be as passionate and as driven about the idea and the product as you are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
I've
absolutely.
seen it fail where people said, oh, this is just a stand-in CEO, and they don't see the vision. They don't feel the passion, and they're not going to stay up 16 hours a day to work on it. They see it as a job. They don't see it as a passion. And I think there is a problem when you install somebody into that position who isn't as passionate and driven as you are.
No doubt. No doubt. I think if it comes to, it's never easy to find somebody, but I think just constantly moving forward. For example, the New Wave group that we just released, talked to Fred Lee and Dan Vanderweide, and they found a CEO at the beginning, and it wasn't a great fit. The beauty is, you're never stuck with just one decision. You can always make changes. And as long as Rusty says, I'm just putting together a hodgepodge of what everybody said. But as Rusty says, you just keep going forward, keep moving forward. You'd have to just get started and move. And if you hire the wrong CEO at first, get rid of them, find somebody else. You're never stuck. As long as you keep moving forward, with your idea, I think you're going to end up in a good place. Look at BackTable, bring it full circle. When Aaron first started it, we were talking about the website and building kits with devices, and everybody's going to have their own procedure kit, and then we're going to talk about whose procedure kit's better and what device are you using, and let's put comments. You should never use that sheath or that catheter.
The reviews and the comments.
Reviews, got to have reviews. How do we get reviews on the site? Nobody wants to review this stuff. I know what we do. We also, Anish is saying, let's do we're going to do a podcast. We're going to get inbound people are going to come in because we've got a podcast. And we were like, what are you talking about? We are doctors. We don't do podcasts. Okay. And then he forced us finally to start doing them. And turns out that's all people wanted was the podcast, and so that's
they can review and comment on us, but
exactly. And that would be funny. But that was the pivot. And as long as we just started, Aaron, and that was all you were the project leader and the driver, and, props to you for seeing that and taking that turn. But that was the point. You just keep running. You just keep running in a direction. You course correct as you go along, and you found that what do you call it? Product market fit. That's pretty much what you found.
Yeah, keep moving is definitely key. And what I love about this episode that we just did was we pulled from all of our prior, we pretty much covered, name dropped every prior guest we've had on the show.
So now you're curious, and you're going to go back and listen to those episodes.
Yes,
I know you reminded me of some good ones.
Yeah. No, they're all good.
Definitely had good
they're
ones.
all good. There's no bad ones. But I think that's a great place to finish, guys. Thank you so much. Again, let's keep it up, and let's get some more brilliant people on this show. Because as we've just proven, we've learned a lot from interviewing these people, and I hope our audience has as well.
Episode 2 will be about VR and AI, as you wanted to talk about it.
Yes, there we go. We should definitely do it again. This is fun. Maybe get a beer involved, and then we'll just see what happens.
I totally agree. Yeah, it'll be like drunk history all over again.
Exactly.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aaron.
Thank you. Thanks, Aaron.
In this episode, our host Bryan discusses starting Palmera, a Stanford Biodesign company developing low-cost CT imaging during bronchoscopic lung biopsy. Palmera is reserving some space for angel investors, so if you would like to learn more about this opportunity, please reach out to Bryan directly. His email address is Bryan, BRYAN, .Hartley, HARTLEY, @Palmera, PULMERA.com. That's Bryan.Hartley @Palmera.com.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, DM us at BackTable Innovation on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. BackTable Innovation is produced and hosted by Bryan Hartley,
Aaron Fritts,
and Eric Gantwerker.
Our audio team lead is Kieran Gannon, with support from Caleb Hodson.
And Ness Smith-Savadoff.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz, with support from
Ann Dang.
Social media and PR by Chi Ding.
And Dana Parker.
Thanks again for listening.
See you again next week.